Taking a look at the day's headlines. US President Donald Trump gushes over his DMZ meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and says he hopes to see him again soon. He also offers rare praise to the media for the way they covered the unprecedented day at the border. South Korea strikes back. Seoul says it's considering taking Japan to the WTO over Tokyo's tightening of restrictions on semiconductor-related exports to its neighbour. Japan's surprise move is thought to have been triggered by a sensitive historical issue. Plus, pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong smash their way into the territory's legislative chamber, defacing the heart of their government. Hong Kong's leader condemns the vandals and calls for society to return to normal ASAP. Now, instead of criticising news outlets for pushing their, quote, fake news, as he calls it, US President Donald Trump says he thinks the hastily arranged encounter with the North Korean leader at the demilitarized zone last weekend was very well covered by the press. Now, CNN, known for being generally critical of President Trump, reported that the DMZ meeting was a political victory for Trump ahead of the 2020 US presidential election. Our Kim Hyo-sun starts us off.
President Trump took to Twitter on Monday to say he had a great meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump also said he hoped to meet with Kim again in the near future. In a separate tweet, he also expressed his satisfaction over the media coverage of his short meeting Sunday with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the DMZ. Thanking South Korean President Moon Jae-in, Trump explained that it was a great call by Kim to have the very well-covered meeting. He added that good things can happen for all. This is a starkly different response from President Trump, who usually lambasts mainstream media outlets for their fake news about him and his administration. Not known for being friendly toward Trump, CNN analyzed that the surprise DMZ meeting was a political victory for President Trump, who has his eyes focused on winning the 2020 election. The article said the DMZ encounter could be a centerpiece of the Peace and Prosperity platform, which he hopes will win the hearts of American voters. It also says the North Korean leader may visit Washington next year. CNN pointed out Kim would want to strike a deal if he fears President Trump might lose in 2020, as he acknowledges that other U.S. presidents would not treat him the same way Trump does. So many predict the working-level nuclear talks that will resume between Pyongyang and Washington in the coming weeks could lead to a first-ever visit to Washington by a North Korean leader. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
US National Security Advisor John Bolton has dismissed reports claiming Washington may settle for less than North Korea's complete denuclearization, referring to a New York Times report on Sunday that suggested the administration may accept a nuclear freeze by the regime. Bolton tweeted that he had never heard nor discussed such an idea, calling the speculation a reprehensible attempt to box in the president. Bolton said there should be consequences. The US has continuously called on North Korea for a full and verifiable shutdown of its nuclear weapons program before concessions are made, such as sanctions relief. Now, staying with the topic, President Moon Jae-in looks set to give his take on that rather unconventional meeting at the DMZ this past weekend. President Moon, believed to be chairing a cabinet meeting this morning, will evaluate the progress of the meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump and how it contributes to the Korean peace process. The South Korean leader is also likely to order members of his cabinet to help related parties in the North and the US carry out the working-level talks. Now, the diplomatic feud between Seoul and Tokyo over historical issues, namely Japan's wartime forced labor of Koreans, has spilled over to the trade front. South Korea's response to Japan's newly announced export restrictions on products needed to make high-tech items was fast and strong on Monday. Trade officials here are leaving nothing off the table, including taking the matter all the way to the top, to the WTO. According to our Godian Hee, there are concerns, though, that some of South Korea's biggest tech firms, such as Samsung, could be hit very hard.
South Korea's trade minister expressed regret over Japan's move, saying limiting exports is prohibited in principle by the WTO agreement.
The Korean government held a ministers' meeting Monday morning to examine the situation and our responses. Going forward, the government will take the necessary countermeasures. One measure being considered is filing a complaint with the World Trade Organization.
Minister Song also mentioned that Japan's move goes against a recent declaration by the G20 leaders, which mentioned countries striving to realize a free, fair, and non-discriminatory trade environment. The ministry held a meeting on the same day with companies that will be affected, but concerns remain. This is because Japan's restrictions will cover high-tech items necessary for making semiconductors, and they could impact Korea's chip exports, which last year accounted for 1/5 of the country's total exports. 2 of the 3 items announced by Japan are related to semiconductor manufacture. One is called resist, the thin layer used to transfer circuit pattern to the semiconductor substrate. The planned export restriction is likely to affect tech giants like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix because Japan accounts for about 90% of the global production of the item. The other is etching gas, and Japan produces around 70% of total global supply. One other item, called fluorinated polyamide, is used for making displays used in Samsung and LG smartphones. And Japan accounts for about 90% of the global supply of this too. Some analysts are downplaying the possible impact on the local economy. According to an analyst from KTB Investment and Securities, the restrictions will persuade the tech giants to find suppliers in Korea, which will benefit local companies making related materials. However, it may not be that easy to find other firms capable of making the materials at a low enough price.
The reason why Korea didn't look for markets other than Japan is because of cost and technology. Japanese firms like Toshiba and Sharp are among the most powerful companies in the world that are capable of producing items with that level of technology at the current cost. So it is good to solve this trade conflict diplomatically.
Industry sources say Korea's tech giants are paying sharp attention to the matter and planning to work with the government to find possible countermeasures. 고르니, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, as a follow-up to that report, shortly after Japan's move on Monday to sharply curb high-tech material exports to South Korea, Seoul actually summoned Japan's ambassador to South Korea to lodge a formal complaint with him. EG1 reports.
South Korea's foreign ministry summoned the Japanese ambassador to South Korea, Yasumasa Nagamine, to lodge a formal complaint Monday afternoon over Tokyo's decision to retaliate against Seoul economically for its court's rulings on forced labor. Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Cho Se-young reportedly expressed serious concerns and regret to Nagamine over the move's potentially negative impacts on South Korean industry and on bilateral ties. Cho also said the move goes against the spirit of free trade and urged Japan to take back the restrictions. The measures were announced earlier in the day by Japan's Trade Ministry, which said that starting from Thursday, bulk licenses to export high-tech material used in smartphones and chips to South Korea will no longer be valid, meaning it'll be harder for South Korea to buy those products. The restricted items are fluorine polyamide, which is used as a liquid crystal display component in TVs and smartphones, and resist and etching gas used in making semiconductors. Japan said it'll also work to get South Korea taken off the list of so-called white countries recognized for having minimum restrictions on trade. It was doing so because it claimed, quote, trust between the two sides has been significantly undermined. Tokyo had threatened Seoul with such measures numerous times, but this is the first it has actually taken them. Based on Tokyo's past statement, the sanctions are apparently in retaliation for the South Korean Supreme Court's decision last year to order Japanese companies, including Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metal Corporation, to compensate the Koreans used for forced labor when Korea was under Japanese colonial rule. Japan has been insisting that it had already paid compensation when the two sides normalized their ties in 1965. But Seoul's top court said the bilateral agreement between the two governments does not take away individual rights to reparations. After months without action from the Japanese side, Seoul's top court froze the Japanese firm's assets in South Korea and is waiting for a response from the firms before selling them off. While Japan's Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary says the restrictions are not a retaliatory move, international and even some Japanese media say the measure is a step too far that directly contradicts the Osaka Declaration agreed at the G20 summit just last week, which advocates free and fair trade. 이지원, Arirang News.
Consumer price growth here in South Korea has remained below 1% for 6 months in a row now. Statistics Korea said on Tuesday consumer prices edged up 0.7% on year in June, and that is far lower than the Bank of Korea's target of 2%. Livestock and fisheries product prices rose 1.8% compared to the same month last year. The agency attributed the low inflation to sluggish growth in service prices, as well as a drop in the prices of petroleum goods compared to the same period last year. Massive demonstrations have once again hit Hong Kong. Protesters forced their way into the parliament there late on Monday amid mounting frustration over the lack of response over their demands to withdraw completely a controversial extradition bill and for Hong Kong's leader to step down. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Kim Mo-kyun, who's filling in for Hong Yu today. So, Mo-kyun, tell us why and how this protest turned so violent.
Mark, the pro-democracy protests have been an annual event that always came in time with the handover ceremony. But even before the anniversary, Hong Kong has seen hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets to oppose the controversial extradition bill, a government proposal to allow suspects be extradited to mainland China to face trial. Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam had already postponed debate on the extradition bill indefinitely, but protesters want the legislation formally withdrawn, as well as Lam's resignation. Furious at their demands going unheard, a large group of protesters swarmed into the main building of Hong Kong's parliament on Monday night, tearing down portraits of legislative leaders and spray painting pro-democracy slogans on the walls. Shortly after, police carrying riot shields and firing tear gas moved inside the legislature and began their crackdown around midnight. And just a few hours ago, Lam made a statement claiming the Hong Kong government is responding to the demands of the public positively. Let's take a listen.
Now, first of all, if the cause of the social tensions that we have seen is a bill to amend the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance, on the 15th of June, I have announced the suspension of the bill. And subsequently, we have explained and elaborated by suspending the bill at this point in time with no timetable and no plan to resume the debate of the bill in the Legislative Council.
Lam also condemned the violence and expressed hopes for society to return to normal as soon as possible. More than 50 people were injured and have been sent to the hospital. The International Atomic Energy Agency has revealed that Iran has followed through on its threat to breach the 2015 nuclear deal, surpassing its permitted limit on enriched uranium. The move appears to be Tehran's response to new U.S. sanctions. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
IAEA Director General Yukio Amano confirmed Monday that Iran has accumulated more enriched uranium than it's allowed, as Tehran followed through on its threat to breach a central limit of its 2015 nuclear deal with major powers. The agency's inspectors verified that the 300-kilogram cap has been surpassed, adding that Iran started to step up its production back in May. The UK has expressed extreme concern over Iran's breach, adding it was urgently considering its next steps with its partners. European nations had previously warned that any violation would bring severe consequences, as the deal allows for the reimposition of multilateral sanctions that were lifted in return for Iran limiting its nuclear activities. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also voiced his concerns and urged Europe to impose automatic sanctions on Tehran.
On this day, I also call on the European countries to stand behind their commitments. You committed to act the moment Iran violates the nuclear agreement. You committed to activate the mechanism for automatic sanctions that was set in the Security Council. Then I say to you, do it. Just do it.
Iranian state media, citing Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, confirmed its breach and threatened to continue raising its uranium enrichment. The minister said the Europeans had failed to fulfill their promises of protecting Iran's interests under the deal. However, he noted Iran's measures were reversible if the Europeans began abiding by their promises. Watchers say Iran is seeking to breach the deal's terms in a step-by-step fashion to pressure the Europeans to resist the pressure of crushing U.S. economic sanctions. 이승재, Arirang News.
Warren Buffett, the world's fourth wealthiest person with a net worth of $88.6 billion has pledged some $3.6 billion worth of his shares in his Berkshire Hathaway conglomerate to 5 charities. The charities include one run by Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates and his wife Melinda Gates. The present will be the 88-year-old's biggest donation ever, topping the $3.4 billion he gave away last summer. Buffett has now given more than $34.5 billion to charities, continuing his 2016 quest to gradually donate over 99% of his fortune to those in need. 15-year-old tennis whiz kid Cori Gauff served up one of the biggest upsets in the history of Wimbledon on Monday, defeating Venus Williams in the straight sets in the first round of the world-famous tournament. Despite being the youngest player to qualify for the main draw in the professional era, Gauff outdueled her idol 6-4, 6-4 and dominated the match despite the 24-year age difference and 269 ranking spots separating the two. At 39, Williams was the oldest woman player in the tournament and has won Wimbledon 5 times, including 2 before Gauff was even born.
Time now for our Life and Info segment, where we focus on information that we do hope will be useful for your everyday life. Now, a growing number of people here in South Korea are being treated for premature hair loss. For those suffering from stress-induced hair loss, exercise and getting enough sleep can mitigate the problem, according to experts. Our Park Se-young with more.
This young man has been under stress from work and now has new worries.
I feel like I'm losing more hair when washing it, and my scalp feels really itchy.
In the last 3 years, 663,000 people were treated for hair loss. Of them, nearly half were people in their 20s and 30s, an age group that starts feeling the effects of stress from work. Unlike genetic or hormonal hair loss, stress-induced hair loss begins 2 to 4 months after the cause of stress, and hair thins out across the whole scalp. When the cause of stress disappears, the lost hair grows back over the course of 6 to 12 months. Both Oriental and Western medicines examine the cause of hair loss before treatment. Generally, experts focus on improving blood circulation and oxygen supply to the scalp. Some patients may undergo immunotherapy or light therapy, and Western medicine often includes steroid treatment.
Medication can be taken orally or rubbed into the scalp, or patients can get steroid injections where the hair has fallen out.
Oriental medicine includes oral and topical medicine, as well as acupuncture in the problem areas to boost circulation.
The stimulus to thinning spots using acupuncture and automicroneedles can restore and increase blood circulation.
In addition to treatments, it's important to manage stress by getting regular exercise and sleeping normal hours. Hair loss can also be made worse by the hot weather and increased sweat and sebum production in the summer. It helps to wear hats or use a parasol and make sure the scalp is clean when washing your hair. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
HPV vaccines have been found to sharply lessen the chance of infections, which could eventually lead to a major reduction in cases of cervical cancer, according to analysis of some 60 million females and males below the age of 30 in 14 wealthy countries where the vaccines were introduced as early as 2007. Scientists from Britain and Canada found the two HPV types that cause 70% of cervical cancers were significantly reduced after vaccination. They found an 83% decline in infections in girls aged 13 to 19 and 66% drop in women aged 20 to 24, 5 to 8 years after vaccination. The study suggests substantial reductions in the number of cervical cancer cases over the next decade. The WHO recommends all girls aged 9 to 14 get the vaccine, but wealthier countries often offer it to young men and women in a wider range of ages. Now, from July 10th, not too far away, foreign visitors to South Korea will be able to go through automated immigration clearance when departing the country to reduce their waiting time. The Ministry of Justice said the service will be available for short-term visitors above the age of 16 who have registered their face and fingerprints upon arrival to South Korea. Those departing from airports at Incheon, Gimhae, Gimpo, Jeju, Daegu and the port of Busan will be able to make use of the service. The ministry says the measure will help alleviate inconvenience for travellers and reduce congestion at immigration desks.
Good morning. The summer heat will build for most parts of the country, and most regions will notice temperatures 1 to 4 degrees Celsius higher than yesterday. And strong sunshine with very strong UV rays will shine down on us with no monsoon rain today. So take extra sun care precautions if you work or spend a lot of time outside. And stay out of the sun and be sure to drink plenty of water, wear lightweight and loose-fitting clothing if possible. Daily highs will be hovering at around 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon, Chuncheon getting up to 32 degrees. Meanwhile, Jeju should have comfortable temperatures at 26 degrees. Strong heat has Korea in its aim for the latter half of the week. We could see readings soaring to 33 degrees Celsius by Friday here in Seoul. Now, monsoon rain is in the forecast for southern provinces and for Jeju Island this weekend, but the rest of us will have to endure muggy conditions. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all the news and weather we have for now on this Tuesday morning here in Seoul. Stay tuned to Arirang TV, and a reminder that we'll have our next newscast coming up at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.
Get all the latest news happening in and out of Korea. The program Foreign Correspondents brings in different journalists from all over the world to sit down and discuss the